Today, I want to talk about something that affects all of us at some point in our life, and that's grief, and in particular, more so, unresolved grief. So, what if I told you that still struggling 2 years after losing someone isn't a sign that you're stuck, but your mind is still trying to protect you? Grief is one of the most misunderstood human experiences. We're very often told directly or indirectly that there's a time limit, a timeline on grieving. A few months, maybe a year, and then we should be better. So my name's Rick Cardwell. I'm a psychodynamic therapist and a counsellor, and I just want to talk through unresolved grief. Now, this is from a message I received from a youngish person last night who kind of felt trapped in this grief, and there was some emotions that came from the grief. So she asked me some questions. I passed on some messages, but I thought I'd do a little video about that because I know grief affects a lot of people, and it's something that I deal with in therapy very, very regularly. So, what happens then if it isn't your reality that you just recover from grief after a few months or a year? What happens when, after 2 years, after losing a loved one, maybe to something horrific, you still can't talk about it without feeling overwhelmed, or worse, when somebody approaches you about it, you get really angry? Well, let's talk about that. And the reason that we should talk about this is because it isn't uncommon, and more importantly, it actually makes sense. When someone dies tragically, maybe suicide or completely unexpected, the grief that follows is not just a grief. It's layered, and it's very complex, and it's often traumatic. You're not only dealing with the loss of someone that you maybe loved deeply, you're also left with a lot of unanswered questions. Questions like, why did this happen? Could I have done something more? Did I miss the signs? Was it preventable? And these questions don't just fade with time. In fact, they become louder when you don't find the answers. And that's where anger comes in. Anger is not the opposite of grief, it's a part of it. For many people, anger becomes a kind of emotional shield. It's easier in some ways to feel anger than to feel the full weight of sadness, helplessness, or guilt underneath. So when someone says, I can't talk about my loved one without getting angry, what they may really be saying is, I can't open that door yet. There's too much behind it. There's also something important to understand about how the brain processes traumatic loss. When a loss is sudden, shocking, or deeply distressing, it can overwhelm the central nervous system. Instead of being processed gradually, the experience gets stuck in a raw, unprocessed form. And this means that even years later, talking about it can feel like it's happening now, like it's happening all over again. Not like a memory, but like a reliving of that moment. And every attempt to talk about it leads to an emotional flooding where your mind learns something. Talking about this is dangerous. So it avoids it, or it defends against it with anger, shutdown, or withdrawal. Now, this isn't a weakness. This isn't a fault within you. This is just your mind protecting you from those emotions. So let's address the idea of 2 years later, a long time later. Time alone does not heal grief. Healing happens when grief is processed, expressed, and integrated, and that process looks different for everyone. Some people have support systems that allow them to talk openly, others don't. Some feel safe expressing the sadness, others were raised to suppress their emotions. So losses are complicated, and these are complicated by trauma, guilt, or unresolved relationships, and that changes everything. So if someone is still struggling after 2 years, it doesn't mean that they have failed to heal. It means something in the healing process may have been blocked, unsupported, or too overwhelming to face alone. And that's where compassion becomes essential. Not pressure, not judgment, not you should be over this by now. So when it comes to getting over grief, what can help to recover from the grieving process? I'd say that firstly, it's important to understand your own emotional responses to grief. If anger is coming up, instead of trying to suppress it or judge it, just try to get curious about it. What might this anger be protecting you from? Ask yourself these questions. What's underlying, what's pinning that anger up? Is there sadness underneath? Is there fear? Is there guilt? Even love that hasn't had space to be expressed can cause these feelings. Secondly, creating safe ways to process the grief is really important. That doesn't necessarily mean sitting down and forcing yourself to talk about it in detail. It can be much more smaller than that and less intimidating. Writing a letter to your lost one that you never send, saying the name out loud when you're alone, allowing yourself to feel something, anything, without shutting it down immediately. Grief work isn't about pushing yourself into overwhelming pain. It's about gently increasing your capacity to stay present with your emotions to allow that healing. And thirdly, support matters more than people realise. This kind of grief, especially after traumatic losses, suicides, often benefits from professional support because it involves both grief and trauma. A therapist can help you process that loss at a pace that feels safe, help you understand why your reactions, and help them make sense to you. They can also help you work through feelings like guilt or anger that might feel too heavy for you to carry alone. And finally, it's important to say this. There is no right way to grieve, but there are always ways to suffer less. Avoiding the pain completely might protect you in the short term, but over time, it can keep you stuck in cycles of anger, numbness, or even isolation. Healing doesn't mean forgetting the loved one that you've lost. It doesn't mean moving on in a way that leaves them behind. It means finding a way to carry the loss without it overwhelming your entire emotional world. And that takes time, it takes patience, and often it takes support. So if you are someone who feels like you should be further along by now, and I want you to hear this very clearly. Your grief is not a schedule. It's not a timetable. It's not a prescribed process. It's asking for something it hasn't received yet. And that's not something to judge. It's something to listen to. So if this resonates with you, you're not alone, and you don't have to figure this out on your own either. So thank you for watching. Please share this video, like, subscribe, whatever you need to do, in the hope that this video will go out, reach more people, and they can find some knowledge, let's say, some advice to help them make their lives feel better. So thank you for watching. I'll be back with another video soon.